Hello everyone and welcome to the Digimon Ghost Game video. This week's episode, which was episode 49, the Crimson Harvest Festival, saw us encounter Witchmon. And Witchmon is another Digimon from the sort of alternate world called Witchenly. I have mentioned Witchenly a few times in various other videos, but just to recap, Witchenly is actually a world that takes place in another Bandai virtual pet called the Magical Witches. So there's Tamagotchi, there's Digimon, but there's also Magical Witches that Bandai also produced. It's a virtual pet that's kind of like in a book shape, and there are 4 different versions, and there's basically a bunch of magic-using Digimon that originated from this world, and then kind of crossed over into the digital world, and became known as Digimon. So we know that Wizardmon is one of these Digimon, but various others are also either implied or straight out outright said to be from Witchenly. Witchmon being from Witchenly means that 2 of her attacks are actually named after different elements from the Magical Witches series. So Aquarie is the blue Magical Witch, and that's water, and then Balleruna, I think it's called, or Balluna, I think. It's a bit of a tongue twister, that one, is I believe the Earth one? I think, or it's whatever the green one is. But in any case, so I get to talk about Magical Witches this week, basically. So while this episode didn't have too much to do with the Magical Witches, it's always nice to have Digimon who originate from Witchenly, meaning Magical Witches by that extent, and it's always nice to see, especially because, yeah, as I mentioned, her attacks straight up reference some of the versions of these Magical Witches there, and I'd love to do more videos on Magical Witches. I've mentioned them a few times, but I will aim to do videos about them more in the future, because they do tie into Digimon, as well as how Tamagotchi also somewhat ties into Digimon with Tamagotchi, like Oyajichi, who becomes Nanimon, for example. But anyway, so this week's episode is another Halloween-centric one. It's October 30th, and Japan really likes US holidays, so they're doing kind of like that. They love Halloween because they get to decorate, they get to dress up. So we get a Halloween episode like we did last year. So this episode has Witchmon show up and turn people into witches if they're cosplaying as witches for Halloween. Then they also find that there are people who aren't dressed up as witches, and she turns those people into rats, which get fed by the cats that are the familiars of these witches. So the characters find out because straight away one of the friends gets turned into a witch, and then the witch turns another friend into a witch, and then the few of the friends who aren't dressed up as witches into rats, and then they get taken away by Release before they get eaten. But then in the next scene we do see a rat get eaten, so that's exciting. So what happens after that is that we go basically straight into we skip the investigation part and we're straight into, okay, we kind of have to infiltrate them. So the main characters, including Angoramon, dress up as witches to kind of find out what Witchmon's doing. She's kind of summoning, like, a castle. I want to believe that this is just, like, a portal to Witchenly, or at least she's summoning part of Witchenly in just random places in public, so that'd be pretty cool, but it's not really said. But then the characters get found out, and then we immediately jump into battle, which has me thinking, wow, it's only a few minutes in, basically. We're less than halfway through, and already we're going to battle. Something really huge must happen. And how wrong I was. So the characters jump into battle, and they're kind of not doing so well. Calscamamon's not really being able to beat Witchmon at all. But then Pumpkinmon shows up and saves them. Hero kind of falls off Calscamamon, and he has to evolve to Canonweissmon. And then he's about to attack Witchmon, pretends to surrender, but then the clock strikes midnight, and apparently her powers run out after Halloween, once Halloween is over. So that's kind of it. And she's like, oh, I just kind of wanted to turn people into witches because I was lonely. And they're like, well, you don't have to turn people into witches. You can be friends with the humans. And then she's like, but humans are trash. I'm like, oh, okay. Because Pumpmon, remember, had the exact same thought process in last year's Halloween episode. He was just trying to make friends, which makes me feel like I wish they went with something more original for this episode, when it's just more or less the same, but not as gruesome as what Pumpkinmon was doing when he was trying to turn people into pumpkins. Witchmon is trying to turn people into witches, and they even have Pumpkinmon show up, and it's, I guess, meant to be, hey look, they're the same kind of thing, but it just feels kind of lazy because it is the same thing that happened for last year's Halloween episode. Character turns, or Mon of the Week rather, turns people into what they are in order to not be lonely. But Pumpkinmon kind of wanted to be friends, and Witchmon is kind of like, but I hate humans. And then Pumpkinmon's like, okay, deal with it anyway, just be nice or I'll come get ya. And they're like, okay. And then the most exciting part of the episode is the fact that Witchmon asks Gammamon if he's the Dark Conqueror, which kind of is the same thing as what the oh gosh, I'm having a mental blank. The one of the new Digimon that showed up and that they ate the colours and Ghost Gammon showed up and ate one of them, and they also said the Dark Conqueror. They didn't use the word in the subtitles, but in the Japanese one it was the same. So the Japanese word used is the same. So that's exciting. It's kind of like a little bit of plot, but all in all this episode was fairly not so good because it just felt exactly like the Pumpkinmon episode. It was nice to have a little bit of a hint of magical witches and Witchenly, but overall we didn't get that much, and it would have been nice to have a little bit more, especially because we have Digimon Dreamers, which is currently running in Psycho Jump, where they've straight up just started talking about Witchenly. We even get a few shots of Witchenly, so far at least, and they're actually straight up talking about it because Wizardmon is from Witchenly. But this episode could have talked about that a little bit more. Instead, it was just the same as the Pumpkinmon episode from last year, and it wasn't that good. It looked really good, though. The use of colours was great, the animation was great, and that's my main highlights for this week, I guess, because that sure is nice. But otherwise, this episode wasn't so good. It wasn't as scary or as spooky as I thought it could have been, especially with how creepy Ghost Game has been lately. I thought they'd really turn this up to 25 or something, rather than just turning up to 11 like previous weeks. But this episode wasn't that creepy. We did have the way that Witchmon turns people into witches is she force feeds them these eyeballs. That was kind of gross, but it wasn't nearly as gross or as gruesome or as graphic as what we've had in previous episodes. So really, it wasn't that good. It's probably, it's not a bad episode, it's just not as good as the other ones, and honestly I feel like it's going to be one of the forgettable ones. No, I still remember last year's episode. We thought Pumpkinmon was stabbing people, but he was just turning them into pumpkins and jack-o'-lanterns, and that was pretty cool. But this week's episode, I feel like it's just going to be one of those forgettable ones. The episode just played out like last year, and that's just, it doesn't feel very original. But in any case, those are my thoughts for this week's episode. Let me know your thoughts about this week's episode, or about Magical Witches, or about Witchenly, or Digimon Dreamers, or anything in the comment section below. Like this video for Magical Witches, because I'm getting one soon, and subscribe if you haven't already, and definitely do so if you want to see more about the Magical Witches. And of course, I'll see you in the next video. Bye!